Hi, this is Professor Stanley, and we are back with our second in a video series on therapeutic communication. Last time we looked at a non-therapeutic interaction and analyzed what was wrong with the interaction. This time we are going to observe a therapeutic interaction and break it down by different therapeutic communication techniques. So sit back and enjoy, and I hope you learn a lot from this video. Hello, Ms. Smith. My name is Brandy, and I will be your nurse for today. May I check your name, Dan? And can you give me your name and date of birth?
Miranda Smith, 12/20/1994.
Okay, thank you so much. And I already looked through your file at the emergency room, so I understand, a little bit about why you wound up here today. But I wanted to ask you about the details of what had been going on in your life that caused you to seek treatment today.
I just feel like everything's out of control.
What do you mean by out of control? Could you clarify that a little bit more?
Just everything. I mean, my husband has been drinking excessively. We almost divorced, but we just got back together. He's still drinking way too much. He started to get treatment, but then this nurse was really mean to him at the facility. So he convinced the doctor to let him go home. So it has just been getting worse ever since then. I really love him, but he's impossible to live with because of the way he acts when he's intoxicated.
So you mentioned how he acts when he's intoxicated. Could you tell me just a little bit more about that?
I mean, he gets really, angry. Then he yells at me. Just can't take being yelled at. Then there's my job, too. My boss is also really mean, and he yells. It's just a lot of stress. So then I started thinking about how this just isn't worth it. And maybe I could drive my car into the bridge or something.
So what you're telling me is that the stress that you've been experiencing as your husband expresses his anger toward you and your boss expresses anger toward you, that it makes you feel so stressed that you've been having some suicidal thoughts.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't think I would ever do it because then God would send me to hell. But I don't want to feel that way. But I'm so embarrassed to be here. I should have been able to handle everything better. It's just, everything that happened with the job loss, and now I have this crazy boss.
Okay, so you mentioned a job loss. Tell me just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I lost the job after a DUI. I guess I feel so guilty too. I mean, my husband started drinking and everything that happened. It was just a crazy night out with the girls. I don't drink that often, just once in a blue moon. I shouldn't have tried to drive home.
So after the DUI, did you have to spend any time in prison?
Unfortunately, yes. Very embarrassing.
Yeah, I know that you're embarrassed to be here, and I know that, some things in your past are very embarrassing to you right now, but I just want to reassure you that you've done a really good thing seeking out treatment. And I know that there have been times in your past where you've probably felt some stress. What kind of things have worked for you in the past to help you to deal with those stressors that you've experienced?
Well, I used to like to run when I was feeling stressed, and I have a cricket that I like to craft on. That really relaxes me.
Well, those are some really good coping skills. That's what we call them. Our name for stress copers, we call them coping skills. And so one of the things that we're going to do while you're here is to hopefully work on those a little bit and kind of help to reduce your stress through learning to use some new ones and building upon the old ones. What would you like to set as your number one priority for treatment? What would be your goals of being here?
Well, I guess I'd like to feel better. Not stressed and anxious all the time. Then maybe then I can work on things with my husband. He would quit drinking and being angry.
Okay. So I'll just kind of let you know how it goes here. Some of the things that we might do to help get to that goal if the interventions are acceptable to you. First of all, the doctors already prescribed some medications to kind of take the anxiety down. And while the medications do help, they are not going to be something that's going to be our only course of treatment. There's a lot more that we need to work on too, right? Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some group therapy and some individual therapy every day with our therapist to help strengthen those coping skills that are already there, and then to also work to develop some new ones. And then finally, we can set up a family therapy after discharge and here on the unit with you and your husband to start working on that relationship. But unfortunately, because we can't control him, while we can maybe steer him in the right direction, we can't stop his drinking because, we don't have control over that. So we're going to work on everything we can do to strengthen your marriage, and hopefully maybe he'll decide to do that for himself. How does that sound?
Good.
Okay, well, I am your nurse here again. I'll be here throughout the remainder of the day. So if you need anything, I want you to come and see me, and if there's anything I can do to make your stay better. And what we'll do is we'll carve out some time this afternoon to kind of see where you are and spend some time talking about things that are going on. Does that sound okay?
Yep, thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
So just like in our previous interaction, you probably have an intuitive understanding that something about this interaction just feels better and feels right. But let's go ahead and break it down by the different elements that make this a therapeutic interaction.
Hello, Miss Smith. My name is Brandy, and I will be your nurse for today. May I check your name, Dan? And can you give me your name and date of birth?
Miranda Smith, 12/20/1994.
Okay, thank you so much.
The nurse begins the interaction by approaching the patient in a calm and friendly manner. She then identifies herself and asks to see the patient's name band and asks the patient her name and date of birth. By doing this, she is meeting the National Patient Safety Goal of identifying the patient correctly. In addition, by setting the tone the way that she has set it, she has set the whole parameter for the nurse and patient interaction.
And I already looked through your file at the emergency room, so I understand, a little bit about why you wound up here today. But I wanted to ask you about the details of what had been going on in your life that caused you to seek treatment today.
As the nurse continues her interaction with the patient, it is very clear that there is no crossing of boundaries as there was in our non-therapeutic communication video. In this case, the nurse is there to talk about why the patient is there and why treatment was initiated. You may also know that the nurse has already told the patient that she familiarized herself with the patient chart before the patient arrival. In this case, the nurse was engaging in what is known as the pre-orientation phase of the nurse-patient relationship. You may be familiar with the work of Hildegard Peplau and how she identified different stages that would occur in the nurse-patient relationship, and the pre-orientation phase was later added. The pre-orientation phase begins with prepping for your assignment, looking through the chart, and being ready for the patient's arrival. Instead of just making assumptions about why the patient is there and taking the word of other providers, even though the nurse has a pretty good history at this point, she instead goes directly to the source and asks the patient about why she has sought treatment today. But in order to do this, the nurse does use an open-ended question, and an open-ended question is one in which a yes or no answer is not possible, and instead the patient must provide a narrative. She also uses a broad opening, saying, "Tell me about what's been going on that caused you to seek treatment today."
I just feel like everything's out of control.
What do you mean by out of control? Could you clarify that a little bit more?
Just everything. My husband has been drinking excessively. We almost divorced, but we just got back together. He's still drinking way too much. He started to get treatment, but then this nurse was really mean to him at the facility. So he convinced the doctor to let him go home. So it has just been getting worse ever since then. I really love him, but he's impossible to live with because of the way he acts when he's intoxicated.
In response to the nurse's broad opening and open-ended question from the previous interaction, we now see the patient respond to that by saying it just seems like everything is out of control. While this may be very informative about how the patient has been feeling, it doesn't give us a lot of concrete information in which to understand the context. So the nurse uses a clarification technique, saying, "May I ask what you mean when you say everything is out of control?" At that point, the nurse allows the patient to continue in a lengthy discourse explaining many different things that have been going on in her life that have led to her seeking treatment today. During this long discourse, you see the nurse use active listening and nonverbal cues to help the patient to continue. You see the nurse nodding her head and saying, and truly listening to what the patient is saying.
So you mentioned how he acts when he's intoxicated. Could you tell me just a little bit more about that?
I mean, he gets really, angry. Then he yells at me. Just can't take being yelled at. Then there's my job, too. My boss is also really mean, and he yells. It's just a lot of stress. So then I started thinking about how this just isn't worth it. And maybe I could drive my car into the bridge or something.
So what you're telling me is that the stress that you've been experiencing as your husband expresses his anger toward you and your boss expresses anger toward you, that it makes you feel so stressed that you've been having some suicidal thoughts.
In this segment of our interaction, we see the nurse begin by using a technique of exploring. The patient has stated that she has difficulty living with her husband because of the way that he acts when he is intoxicated. And the nurse encourages the patient to continue to discuss more fully the experience of that situation and better identify her thoughts and feelings and the dynamics that are associated with it. Once again, we then see the nurse engage in a period of active listening with the patient, where the patient responds to the nurse's question and talks about her feelings regarding her husband, her boss, and suicidal thoughts. At that point, the nurse shows that she's been actively listening and paraphrases back what the patient has said, saying, "Well, let me see if I understand you," as she summarizes the patient's statements in her own words and identifies what has been stated and discussed.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't think I would ever do it because then God would send me to hell. But I don't want to feel that way. But I'm so embarrassed to be here. I should have been able to handle everything better. It's just, everything that happened with the job loss, and now I have this crazy boss.
Okay, so you mentioned a job loss. Tell me just a little bit more about that.
The nurse continues to listen as the patient has engaged in a lengthy discourse about what has been going on. And as the nurse is practicing active listening, she identifies another thing that the patient says that may have relevance and says, once again, in an exploring statement, "Could you tell me more about that job loss?"
Yeah, I lost the job after a DUI. I guess I feel so guilty too. I mean, my husband started drinking and everything that happened. It was just a crazy night out with the girls. I don't drink that often, just once in a blue moon. I shouldn't have tried to drive home.
So after the DUI, did you have to spend any time in prison?
Unfortunately, yes. Very embarrassing.
As the nurse continues to actively listen to the patient and to use exploring techniques, the patient begins to reveal some of the past experiences that may be contributing to the current problem she is having. She mentions that she herself has had some problems with drinking that the nurse will want to further explore, and also has expressed a great deal of guilt over her actions, but the nurse continues to approach her with active listening and non-judgmentalism. As the nurse continues to listen to the patient with this attitude of non-judgmentalism, she is really using the therapeutic communication technique of therapeutic neutrality. Therapeutic neutrality is when a nurse maintains a non-judgmental, objective perspective, accepting information from the patient without showing any sort of approval or disapproval of what the patient is saying. This allows the patient to be able to express their feelings openly without fear of judgment and without any sort of rejecting behavior from the nurse. We even see some expression of empathy through the tone when the nurse asks the question of, "Did you have to spend any time in prison as a result of it?" Due to limitations in length, I am going to pause there, and we are going to continue this in another video as we continue to explore the therapeutic communication techniques used in this patient interaction.